right, so we are recording this webinar to post to our scsparkscience.org website. Thanks all for joining us today. I'm Nick Fisichella, President and CEO with Schoodic Institute at Acadia National Park. And you are all here because you're interested in the Second Century Stewardship, which I'll call SCS Research Fellowships here at Acadia National Park. And the request for proposals that is now open. So this will be a webinar with myself and Abe Miller-Rushing to give some of the summary details on the fellowship, and there'll be a chance for Q&A at the end. Share my screen, and we have a slide deck to work through. All right, can you see that, Emma? Great. All right, today's speakers, again, I'm Nick Fisichella, and then Abe Miller-Rushing, who's the science coordinator with the National Park Service here at Acadia, is the second presenter, and please feel free to use the chat box with questions during the presentation, or you can write them down to ask afterwards, and Emma can monitor the chat, and she can butt in if there's any specific questions as we're moving through. So there'll be 5 sections that we'll go through today here: the program overview, nuts and bolts, what's happening in Acadia, the priorities for science, what we are looking for in an SCS fellow, and then how to apply. And Second Century Stewardship originated in 2016 with during the centennial of the National Park Service, and Second Century looking forward to the next 100 years of science and stewardship. And these are the main public and private partners in the initiative. So the big goals for Second Century Stewardship are really to advance science and stewardship in national parks, and especially in Acadia, and to really increase public understanding, support awareness of science, and also public engagement with science, and for the science projects to really address major management challenges that the park is facing. The fellowship program, we've had 15 fellows since 2016. We'll have 2 to 3 new fellows for 2022. And again, the focus on informing park management, and the fellowships also are about communicating science. Parks are about the best platform there is for communicating science with a diversity of audiences, and also looking for a potential for long-term research. We want to really be building a community of science and opportunity to work long-term in national parks. So on the science communication side, we do provide training, science communication training that's really focused on science in parks and engaging with both park managers and park audiences. And so every fellow gets a 3-day training in science communication. We recognize many of you may already have science communication skills, which is fantastic. It's not necessary. What is necessary is an interest in science communication and in telling the stories of your science. And there's lots of different platforms on which to do that. And then there's another great opportunity with working in a park. There's opportunity to inform education that's happening in the park, from working with teacher fellows that are also in the park, to engaging in citizen science projects, to helping to inform some of the education programs that happen here in Acadia, such as Schoodic Education Adventure, which is our immersive residential program for middle school students that happens at Schoodic Institute. And then finally, the cornerstone here is addressing some of the major challenges that Acadia National Park is facing, and Abe can talk about that a little bit more, some of the management priorities. There's a real push to be forward-looking, recognizing changes ongoing and accelerating in the park, and the science that FCS fellows are undertaking is really critical to informing park management. So nuts and bolts of the program. First thing, who should apply? You all should apply. We encourage early career scientists, postdoctoral researchers, graduate students. I want to emphasize encourage here. It's not a requirement or a restriction. There are no restrictions on age. Everyone all ages are eligible. We are looking to foster long-term relationships between scientists and parks. The requirement are that you're legally in the US and at least 18 years of age, and neither Abe nor I are eligible because we work for Schoodic Institute and National Park Service. And if you work with me or with Abe, then you also are not eligible, but some of your partners, scientists, would be. The application requirements, and all of this is in the RFP, which you may already have in your hands, and it also is available at scsparkscience.org. It's a pretty standard application process. We try to make sure it isn't too long or complicated, pretty standard components. Project narrative is only 3 pages, and in part that we kept it short so that to see how you can communicate your science in a relatively small or short project narrative. And then again, read the full RFP for details. Funding for this, it is a budget limit of up to $20,000 for the total award, and then that can be spent over 1 to 2 years. And we recognize $20,000. This is probably not the only source of funding for the project, and so we have a good bit of flexibility in the budget and how you're spending this, recognizing that you may be using other sources for other parts of the project. And then as part of the award, we do provide housing at Schoodic Institute during the field research. And also the communication training, you just have to give the time to that training. Then evaluation criteria, pretty standard. Is this a good science project? Intellectual merit. Does this relate to park management, and will this inform some of the critical management challenges that the park faces? This is a really important criterion, and we often get proposals that are fantastic as far as intellectual merit goes, but they may be on a subject such as the endangered right whale, which lives off the coast in waters that are not managed by the National Park Service, and thus are not a direct management priority for the park. And your interest and skills, really are your interest in science communication. And there is a very short essay as part of the application to just show your interest in science communication. And then again, that potential for long-term research that I mentioned earlier. And then these criteria all have a weighting to them. This is also in the RFP. The one thing I'll just say here, we weighted the qualifications of the applicant, the bottom one here, slightly lower. What that's really intended to reflect is that we recognize that applicants will be in different places in their career paths, and thus a graduate student is going to have a different level of experience and a different length CV and publication record than an assistant professor. And we will take that into account when looking at the applications. And then reporting, of course, with any grant, there is required reporting, annual report, final report, and communication products. Again, we try not to make this too onerous, and the annual reports are part of actually the research permit that's required to do work in the park. The final report can be the manuscript the journal article that you'll be publishing from your research. And then the communication products are ones that you'll be developing with the communication specialist during the fellowship. COVID-19, I imagine we've all heard about this, heard about it a little bit too much. We recognize that this throws a monkey wrench into all sorts of things seemingly all the time, and that we are flexible and will be working with you to make sure that you can get your research accomplished safely, following all the existing health and safety guidelines. The schedule for this proposals are due at the end of next month, October 28th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Then we'll have review over the subsequent few months with announcement of the award in spring of 2022. And the panel of reviewers will include scientists and managers, and it may include scientists outside of your area of expertise. And so you'll want to make sure that the proposal is understood by professional managers as well as other scientists. All right, with that, I will hand it over to Abe to give us a little bit more background on the park and what we're looking for in a fellow. You are muted still, Abe.
All right, you can go to the next slide. Thank you, Nick. So just to reiterate, my name's Abe Miller-Rushing. I'm the science coordinator for Acadia, and we're very excited to be able to work with the Schoodic Institute to run this fellowship program. And at the National Park Service, we're a very mission-driven agency. So we always start all of our talks pretty much involve some aspect of mentioning the mission. So our mission, a few important things to get out of this mission. One is that we are preserving natural and cultural resources and values. So that's a broad suite of things that we're involved with managing, and that in the other part of the mission, we're managing them for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration. So we're charged with providing access and also using the resources for education to educate and inspire. And so we're in the forever business to preserve these resources for the long run, and to provide access and educate and inspire. And this is a big job, and it requires a lot of really good science to do this because it's a daunting challenge, daunting mission to be charged with. Can you go to the next slide? Thanks. And so here in Acadia, with Schoodic Institute is one of 17 research learning centers in the National Park Service. And as this network of research learning centers were created back around 2000, and they're charged with a particular role in the National Park Service to kind of aim for this vision of national parks as natural laboratories, tellers of science narratives, and exemplars of using science to manage natural and cultural resources. So the idea is to really bring a lot of science into national parks, use them as key resources for science, and also to tell stories, to communicate about that science. And this science is really important right now because the National Park Service historically managed to keep things the same as they were in the past. That's not possible anymore, as you guys well know. And instead, we have to shift our management approach to adapting and responding to rapid and continuous change, which requires a pretty big change in how we interpret that mission of preserving things unimpaired for future generations. And we're focusing on long-term ecological and cultural integrity and viability right now. And that's easy to say. It's harder to actually know how to do that or even how to measure it. What exactly are we meaning when we're managing for ecological or cultural integrity as conditions change? And so that's one of the things that we really want our fellows to help us out with. Okay, next slide. And so the park is changing quickly. And so these are just a few examples of changes that are happening here. In terms of our plants, we're seeing, 1 out of every 6 of the plant species that were here 120 years ago no longer occur in Acadia. We have a lot of invasive species like the purple loosestrife. We have a pretty good handle on most of the invasive plants, but not all of them. The monarch in that picture is native. We have we have insects and diseases like black-legged ticks, or black-legged ticks aren't insects, but we have diseases like Lyme disease carried by black-legged ticks. Our bird communities are changing. Our lake and freshwater ecosystems are changing. We're seeing more storm surges along the coast, which are causing damage to our coastal resources. And, we're just starting to really engage more closely with our kind of clamming and marine worm harvesting communities along the coast, and manage our intertidal marine or soft bottom intertidal more closely. So all of these ecosystems are changing dramatically, and will be changing even more dramatically in the future. And we really want future looking science to help us manage those changes. And so we're shifting our approach to management and science. So we're thinking about these whole socio-ecological system. So a number of fellows projects have actually included both social science and natural science components to them. We're also doing this plan, do, learn, this adaptive management cycle, which historically was a best practice, but that people talked about but didn't do. But now we really don't have a choice because we know a lot less about how to manage in a changing environment. So we really have to learn as we go. And we need to engage the community and partners, because there's a lot of value judgments in some of the decisions we're having to make. And they impact these decisions impact our communities and partners, and also to manage at the required landscape scales for some of these challenges. It requires those kind of partnerships. And so these are all things that that your proposals could be thinking about. Next slide. And so what are we looking for in proposals? These are the goals of the fellowship. Really, this is just reiterating something that Nick mentioned earlier. We're interested in advancing conservation and ecosystem science here in Acadia and more broadly, informing park management, communicating science, and bringing in people who are interested in long-term research in national parks, and in Acadia specifically. We're interested in a really broad range of research topics. This list is not comprehensive by any means, but just to show you that there's a range of disciplines that are relevant for park management, from citizen science, cultural resource work, genomics, recreation research, and then basic ecology, which we have a lot of. But these are all areas of research. And I do also want to mention that we're interested in kind of Western approaches to this, as well as indigenous science and cross-cutting approaches at the integration of traditional ecological knowledge and Western approaches to science. And I'll come back to, we have one fellow that's working on a project like that right now. Next slide. And this is the successful proposals will have these characteristics. This is kind of in addition to the, so Nick mentioned the kind of weighted guidelines, and those weighted guidelines are exactly the things that we give to the reviewers. But what we find is that the most successful proposals have these traits too, and that they have high potential to increase our understanding of response to changes in ecological systems, that they address high priority information needs to Acadia. And there's a lot of documentation that you can find in online about our priorities, or you can email us, and of course in this talk we're highlighting at least our top priorities. We want the research to be cost effective, reasonable, and achievable. Don't overpromise. We know that $20,000 will only go so far. So our expectations aren't the same as they would be for like a $300,000 NSF proposal. So definitely be reasonable with what you're proposing, and the reviewers and we will appreciate that. And provide evidence that you're committed to connecting research and communicating it to varied audiences and to applying it to management. And so it's not that we need you to be super skilled at that, but just evidence that you're interested in it. Okay, next. So some people, a lot of people think that national parks really don't like kind of manipulations on the land. That's a lot of researchers are kind of surprised about what you can do as a part of your research in national parks. For instance, you can actually have experiments that test approaches to restoration or climate adaptation. You can test management actions that are intended to influence human behavior. We had a long history of research how to convince people to stay on trails, which was explicitly to influence human behavior, but there are other kinds of studies that you can imagine as well. Applications of technologies, right? At the moment, drones are not allowed to be flown in national parks, but but hopefully by the time these projects are funded, that will be changed, but maybe not. So be aware of that if you're proposing to use drones. But other types of technology applications are definitely good. We definitely have projects putting buoys out and other things in freshwater systems and in forests. Archaeological and ethnographic research is totally fine. And anyhow, all of these things are fine. And if you have questions about your research, feel free to email me directly and I'd be glad to help kind of guide it towards something that we can make happen. Next slide.
And Abe, just on this slide, just to emphasize it, the second to last bullet, projects beyond park boundaries, including multi-park projects. We'd love to see projects that include more than just Acadia. One of the fellows from this past year is doing work in 3 national parks at Cape Cod National Seashore, Boston Harbor Island National Recreation Area, and Acadia. So we definitely encourage multi-park projects.
Yes, absolutely. That's a big goal for us. We know that can be difficult given the budget constraints, but we really like multi-park projects for sure. And that doesn't have to be multinational park projects. It could be multi-protected area projects. So projects that span protected areas as well. So land trusts or fish and wildlife refuges. Okay, next slide.
It should be on the next slide. Do you see the fellows?
Oh, there we go. Now it was slow on my screen. So so we funded 15 Second Century Stewardship Fellows so far. You can see their pictures here. I'll walk through I think 4 examples of projects. Next slide. So you can get an idea of projects that work well. And feel free to reach out to these guys if you have questions about the program too. Next slide.
Sorry, it may be slow on my end, Abe.
Okay. Can you remind me who the first one is?
It's Alessio Mortalidi.
Okay. All right. The next slide, if people, can anybody else see the next slide? Or is it still the Second Century Stewardship Fellows, the 15 pictures?
Just the 15 pictures.
Okay. Oh, here we go. Here's Alessio's slide. All right. So one project, for example, is Alessio Mortalidi, and this is an example of, actually, I think all these are kind of interesting in terms of how they are beyond what some people would think would be possible. So Alessio was looking at the role of small mammals in the shifts in tree species ranges, and the idea is that the small mammals can eat seeds, so they can destroy seeds, they can cache them and essentially plant them. And so they have a big role in deciding which trees will do well when they get here. So Alessio brought in seeds from areas further south that are expected to get here, along with seeds from trees here locally, some of our native species, put them in traps in these seed selection experiments, and watched which seeds the small mammals preferred and watched where they put them, and then went out and retrieved them, but got an idea. And he found that, for example, that the big hard seeds are going to look like they're going to do well because the small mammals liked them and they tended to cache them in places that would be good for them to germinate. And on these next 4 slides, you can see that there are headlines from communication products that came out of this. So this study got covered in Anthropocene magazine, the online magazine, and published in Oikos. Next slide.
Sorry, it looks like my internet's super slow. Next one should be Chris Nadeau.
So this is Chris Nadeau, which was another really interesting study where he was looking at these rock pools, freshwater rock pools that occur right just above the intertidal line. And the idea that these are kind of confined, very small ecosystems, right? That go all the way from algae to plankton to small insect larvae. And there could be, he found that he could replicate these rock pool ecosystems in these kind of rubber tubs and manipulate the climate through by manipulating water levels or by manipulating like with this open top greenhouse chamber. And he was able to so he's essentially creating a lab mouse for ecosystem ecology, ecosystem studies. And so you could manipulate the climate and we could manipulate management actions and test those across replicates of this small whole ecosystem. Next slide. I think the next one is Allie Gardner. And Allie, what she did was she looked at where ticks are abundant in the park. So she did a bunch of surveys of tick abundance in the park and their habitat associations. And this was tightly linked to public health, right? And so what she ended up finding is the distribution of black-legged ticks was tied to where the historic fire in 1947, which burned about a third of Mount Desert Island. So the black-legged ticks tended to do well in those areas, which tended to be more hardwoods than our other areas of the park. Also tend to be in our most highly visited areas. So unfortunately, the black-legged ticks are most abundant where visitors go. But that really directly informed public health efforts by the park. And the last of the 4 examples I think is Bonnie Newsom, who is at the University of Maine and is doing research looking at old archaeological specimens and sites that were originally surveyed by kind of traditional old white archaeologists, and she's taking a Wabanaki approach to reinterpreting these specimens using Wabanaki language and also tying them directly to their uses in Wabanaki culture and current connections to current Wabanaki culture. And of course, Acadia is on Wabanaki land, and the Wabanaki still have very close ties to the park. And so kind of getting into the logistics of these, of the projects, all research in the park requires permitting. And so as a part of the research process, this isn't a part of the proposal, but you just want to be aware that this is going to happen, that there will be permitting requirements. We review these permits to avoid long-term negative impacts to park resources and visitors. And there's some special kind of cases that require special hurdles if there may be commercial applications of research products, which is totally fine. It just requires a benefits sharing agreement. Since national parks are public lands, there just has to be an agreement for how to share benefits back with the taxpayers from any commercial outcomes. There are extra requirements that require for projects that involve specimen collection or work with cultural sites. Again, that's totally fine. And the idea is that we will preserve, we're charged with preserving specimens in perpetuity. So there are just extra hurdles for documenting those. For social science, there's requirements for IRB kind of approvals and whatnot. Animal care and use, there's requirements for IACUC approvals as well. And then there are reporting, which is the same kind of reporting that Nick mentioned, annual reports, which are very short, and final reports at the end. And we will pair you with mentors to help connect your project with management. These will largely be park staff or other managers appropriate for whatever your project is. And the idea is that they'll work with you to help refine your sampling design and so that your project can maximize its relevance to park management. And at the end of your project, they'll work with you to how to translate your results to park management plans when that's appropriate. Next slide. And you'll, as a part of this, as Nick mentioned earlier, you'll work with education and communication experts to help get the message out. So you'll go through, in your proposal, you should figure out about 80 hours to dedicate towards education and communication related activities. And that'll be in part a workshop and in part just time working on communication. You're welcome to do more than that, but at least that. And then activities could include school groups, interpretive programs, videos, and other things. Whatever is appropriate for the audience that is most kind of the target audience of your research. And next slide. And I think now I hand it back over to Nick to talk about how to apply and round out the talk.
Great, thank you, Abe. And just, the last couple of slides here. We have an online portal for the applications, and you can find this at scsparkscience.org. The application portal should be open, and you can go in and out of it. You'll have a login and password that you need to register for, and then you can work on your application over the coming weeks. You don't have to do it all in one setting within the application platform. And we do have Emma Albee on the webinar that she can help with answering any questions on the application process. And this is just what it looks like, the portal. There's the application details, or multiple tabs, application details, the proposal details. You can then save as a draft and then submit as final prior to the due date and time on October 28th at 5 p.m. And with that, that's the end of the presentation. And so we can open it up to questions, and either in the chat or you can unmute yourself to ask any questions that you have. And on this page, you'll see there's a few different sites for more information. scsparkscience.org is the best spot to go. Also schoodicinstitute.org. And then for more information on data, on past research in Acadia, you can go to irma.nps.gov. That's irma.nps.gov. That is basically the big database for National Park Service for research and reports from parks actually across the system. And so you can search for Acadia National Park. And then finally, for email address, when you think of a question later on tonight, you can email it to scsparkscience@schoodicinstitute.org. And that should also be in the RFP as well, the contact info. So with that, any questions? All right, thank you, everyone. Yeah,
Sorry, I had a quick question.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to hear about one of the big goals being to cultivate a long-term relationship. I'm curious what that relationship looks like now with your past fellows.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. One example would be continuing to partner with that scientist on additional research projects and proposals. So a couple of our previous fellows have gone on to other fellowships, such as the Smith Conservation Fellowship. One of our previous fellows, Chris Nadeau, is doing his Smith Conservation Fellowship research in Acadia. And actually he and Abe are co-PIs on another proposal that was recently submitted for even more continued work in the park. And so I think that's the way that we are envisioning it, that we would work together and that you'd be able to build upon the research that you conduct for the SCS fellowship and build upon that for future grants and projects. Abe, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I just say that, like, as a part of the project, we want to build those relationships, but it doesn't always work out that we have funding to continue work. But I would say probably about half the fellows are actively, so half of the past fellows are active, like have active funded research projects, and we will work with folks to get to, like Nick mentioned, we will co-PI proposals and whatnot, and we're actually kind of nice co-PIs to have because I'm free. My salary is already paid for, so anyhow, so those are some of the benefits later on for some of the fellows. Anyhow, and from us, we get great science.
Great, thank you.
Alice, you had a question?
Hi, a question about locations within the park. Is this looking at spots on the island or on Schoodic, or is it also including islands that are part of the Park Service holdings?
All of the above. Abe can maybe say a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think anywhere in the park, and especially fee land. So if you get a map of the park that has our land that we own outright, and we also have managed a number of easement areas, and some of those we would need special permission, but those could be potentially open to research as well. And then of course we have a number of partners around the area, Maine Coast Heritage Trust and others that own land around the area. But yeah, it's open to all the park, not any particular park.
To follow up on that, if I may, would be just for places that are a bit remote, like an island. Is it possible to ask the Park Service to help with transportation?
You mean like to get out to, yeah, right, to get like boat access out to some of the islands?
Yeah, because boat time is expensive.
Yeah, I would say we could definitely talk about what would be reasonable to ask for boat time. We do monitor the islands, and so we do go out to the islands periodically, and so there may be opportunities to hitch a ride.
Great, thank you.
But I'll go next to a question in the chat and then to Matt. So Tegwin in the chat asked Abe, this is a question you can answer. Can you comment on the timing of the IACUC requirements?
Yeah, so IACUC is for any research involving vertebrate or handling of vertebrates, and the IACUC requirement. So we just require IACUC approval before the research project starts. It does not need to be done before the proposal. So just before the research project starts. There is, well, you can have the Park Service has an IACUC itself, an IACUC committee, but your own institution, if you're at UMaine, that will take UMaine approval of IACUC and then run it through our own, our Park Service IACUC usually rubber stamps that. So just running it through your own institutional IACUC is good enough for us.
Great, thanks. And Matt.
Hi, Nick. Thanks so much. Good to see you and hear you. I'm just curious how the research priorities may have evolved in the 4 or 5 years that you've been running this. Just over time, have those priorities shifted at all, or are they evolving to be more dynamic in some way?
That's a good question, and I'll let Abe weigh in. I think a few things we've recognized going beyond Acadia has been one of the desires. So multi-park projects, cultural resource projects. So for example, the archaeology project from that was 2 years ago, Bonnie Newsome. We've been I think casting a little bit wider net on the types of projects. Climate change adaptation has been getting more emphasis, certainly across the national park system, and the idea of this new management framework has been introduced. It's called the Rad Framework. Rad is resist, accept, direct. It's literally the spectrum of climate change adaptation options. And so some of the research now in the park is using that Rad framework to help inform management decisions in Acadia, and places and resources where the park may want to resist change or accept change, or to figure out where is it appropriate to direct change towards new desired conditions. Have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that we're getting kind of more convinced over the years that we've been running this that we really need information about how to forward thinking, thinking about how we're going to manage in the future, and how we're going to, and the socio part of socio-ecological systems. How do we bring together the people into the equation and think about the future? And that doesn't mean that studies, paleoecological studies can help us think about the future, but one of our big, the ways we think about it is, how are we going to use this to help us manage in the future? And a lot of times how things have changed in the past is about as good a predictors of how things are going to change in the future as we got. But those are, I think, the people part and the future part are two of the big challenges that we're struggling with. And yeah.
Thank you.
Madeline.
Are you eligible to apply for the fellowship if you already have a research permit with Acadia, if you're looking to further the broader impacts, future implications, management options, and the communication aspects?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, if you're already working in the park, that's great. That does not, you are still eligible. And I think many of the previous fellows had been doing research already in Acadia, and I think what that reflects is that the researchers had opportunity to meet with the managers and learn more about the management priorities and challenges in the park. And so definitely encourage you to reach out as you're thinking about your research proposal and formulating it, and Abe or another manager at the park will can speak with you to help you as you try to make sure that it meets the challenges the park's facing.
Thank you, Nick.
Hi there. So related to that question, I am very interested in the management of invasive species. And Abe, you had mentioned that a lot of them are under control, but there are some that are probably still very troublesome. And I was wondering, just as a quick question, and I could definitely reach out and talk to you more later, but what are the major players that are still a pain in the neck for the park?
All right. So invasive plants, I would say glossy buckthorn is the current big pain in the butt. And so we have, that's the last remaining kind of really big population of invasive plants is glossy buckthorn. And then we're also managing re-invasion of basically all of the invasive plants.
Oh no.
And
Yeah.
so it's, I mean, that'll be a forever problem. And so thinking about
Okay.
how do we sustainably manage re-invasion, I think is a big question.
Great.
For insects, invasive insects is another big thing that we've made basically no progress on. I think we basically just monitor that and limit firewood transport. And so
Are any of the insects coming in on the plants, like co-invaders?
On some of the invasive plants.
Yeah.
So that's actually a good question. I don't know, but we definitely have, so like a very recent invader is the hemlock woolly adelgid has finally made it here, and was just identified in the park last year. And there are others of your kind of typical, if you wanted to find out more about the invasive insects, you could, we would be glad to talk to you about those, and the plants too. That's definitely the area where we have invested the most over the past 30 years in resource management, is invasive species management.
It's a tricky problem to solve. There doesn't seem to be a one-size-fits-all solution.
Nope.
So, okay, great. Thank you for that. And I'll reach out and we can talk more one-on-one.
Yeah, absolutely.
All very good questions. And any last ones?
I just wanted to give a quick plug for the Acadia National Park Science Symposium, which is going to be on October 19th, a Tuesday from 12 to 2:30. And so it's going to be focused on the Rad Framework that Nick talked about. And it would be a good chance if you're interested in hearing from some of the researchers doing work in Acadia, and also interacting with them in breakout rooms. And so you can register for that on the Schoodic Institute's website if you're interested.
That's a great point.
Thanks for the reminder on that, Emma. And that's on the calendar page. Is that the best place to find it?
Can you say the date
Great.
one more time?
October 19th.
I've got to run. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks. I'm just looking to see if I can find the link here. I'll post it in the chat real quick for anyone for the Science Symposium. Yeah, this is a great place to learn more about what's happening in the park, to interact with other researchers, the community of science that we are trying to build and foster here in Acadia. So with that, thank you all so much for attending today, and reach out with any questions. And we look forward to seeing your proposals and getting you to do science in Acadia. Yeah. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you guys, really appreciate it.
Did I
Emma,
stop
you can
recording?
stop the recording.